Alright guys, welcome back to another review in my Nolan Batman series. If you missed it, last week we kicked this off by discussing Batman Begins. Now we are moving on to its sequel, The Dark Knight. Full disclosure, before we get into The Dark Knight, I know that there's a lot of stuff in this movie that people would want me to talk about. I'm not going to cover all of it. Obviously, it's a 2.5-hour movie. So just go into this knowing that I'm going to forget to talk about something that you're going to want me to talk about. So that's where I leave it up to you guys. Comment down below all the stuff that you guys want to talk about The Dark Knight. Alright, without further ado, here we go. Alright, so in The Dark Knight, it picks up a year after Batman Begins. You've got Bruce Wayne as Batman working alongside Commissioner Gordon and Gotham's newly appointed district attorney, Harvey Dent, played by Aaron Eckhart. And together, the three of them are making some pretty strong progress in taking down the key members of Gotham's mob. All seems to be going pretty well for them until the clown prince of crime, the Joker, played by the late great Heath Ledger, arrives in Gotham. A foe unlike Batman has ever faced before, and one that pushes not just Batman but all of Gotham to the limits they've never experienced before. Alright, so before we get to the obvious standout of this movie, Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker, let's focus on Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne and Batman and where they are at this point, because I love the way this movie picks up from Batman Begins. We see that the Batman has become the symbol of hope that Bruce hoped it would become for Gotham, even with some of its citizens starting to rise up against the crime lords of the town, dressing up in their homemade Batman suits made out of sports equipment.
What gives you the right? What's the difference between you and me?
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
He's also got a great team working with him, working alongside Commissioner Gordon, as well as Harvey Dent, a guy who hasn't just gained a lot of Gotham's trust, but a lot of Bruce Wayne's trust as well, to the point that Bruce Wayne sees him as his successor to when he stops being Batman. Harvey Dent's going to take on the mantle. Not necessarily the mantle of being Batman, but the mantle of being Gotham's hope. There's also a lot more collaboration between Bruce, Alfred, once again played by Michael Caine, and Lucius Fox, once again played by Morgan Freeman. And when you combine all of Bruce's resources and the team that he has put together, Batman almost comes across with a sense of being untouchable in this film. To the point that if you're a leader of the mob, it don't matter if you've escaped all the way back to Hong Kong, Batman's gonna go to Hong Kong, get you, and bring you back to Gotham with no problem. The first act of this film just does a really good job establishing the fear that has been put into the criminal underbelly of Gotham through the Batman, which is one of the reasons that the Joker being the villain for this movie is beyond perfect. At the end of Batman Begins, they teased that the Joker would be the villain for the next film. And boy did they deliver on that promise, more than I think Christopher Nolan even thought that he could. Yeah, you have to. It's a crime not to. You have to talk about Heath Ledger's iconic performance as the Joker when talking about The Dark Knight. It's like an unspoken rule. And come on, with this movie being almost 14 years old, what can I say about this performance that hasn't been said already? The way that Heath Ledger plays and portrays this character, it just takes your breath away. Especially as someone like me who loves watching performances. I did a lot of acting stuff in high school. The acting aspect of filmmaking was the gateway to me actually loving movies. For a long time, I wanted to be an actor. So I appreciate a good performance, and Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker is legendary. I love the little nuances that he has in the Joker. He gives the Joker so much depth. Just the way that he holds himself, his posture, the way he's always licking his mouth when he talks. Well, it's simple. We kill the Batman. He's completely unpredictable. He's menacing. He's conniving. He's sadistic. You can just tell looking at this guy, he is psychologically unstable. He's a merciless killer, and I love that anytime someone in this movie calls him a freak, you can tell that that's something he just hates. Like, he gets this look on his face where you just fear the life of the person that just called him a freak, and every single person in this movie that calls him a freak dies by his hand. But Heath Ledger is still able to infuse that sadistic humor within the Joker that is so essential to the character.
Let her go.
Very poor choice of words.
He's also incredibly smart, demonstrated by the bank robbery scene at the beginning of the film where he's able to convince his team members to knock each other off one by one until only he remains to take all of the money. He has this presence to him that whenever he steps into the room, he just has full control over that room. When he shows up at Bruce Wayne's party as the Joker and the whole crowd's just frozen watching him, you're along with that crowd as the audience member. You can't take your eyes off of him. The charisma, the stature, the little ticks that he gives to the Joker, it's all so meticulously thought out. It's brilliant. It is the most brilliant performance in any comic book movie ever made. And while Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker is definitely the #1 factor as to why this character works so well in the movie and is so remembered in this movie, it's not just the performance of the Joker that makes this villain so great. It's also the writing that Christopher Nolan and his brother Jonathan Nolan gave to this character throughout this story. The whole movie revolves around him. Realistically, the Joker is only physically on screen for about 1/4 of this movie. But his presence is always felt because of how his character affects the rest of the characters in the story. Joker in this movie is the chaotic through line throughout the entire narrative, and that's one of the things that makes him such an awesome villain for The Dark Knight, because he comes at the worst possible time for Batman. Gotham is looking like it's having some hope, the streets are starting to get cleaned up, and in comes this chaotic force of nature with the Joker, who totally doesn't play by Batman's rules. You can tell just the interactions that Batman and Joker have in this movie, the way that the Joker talks to Batman, the way that he's not affected or scared by Batman, you can see it on Batman's face. This is a villain like he's never fought before. The Joker's always one step ahead of Batman and Gordon and the entire police force, that you really start to see how it strains on this group of characters of Batman, Gordon, and Harvey. And speaking of Harvey Dent, I love how Christopher Nolan in this movie, while telling a Joker story, intertwined a Two-Faced origin story. Because with Harvey Dent at the beginning of this movie, he is a respected citizen, a respected higher up in Gotham by pretty much all the citizens of Gotham. But as the movie goes on and as the Joker just keeps tormenting and torturing Gotham, you start to see Harvey Dent going on his downward spiral as he starts to get more angry and his anger takes over. And in his anger, he starts making rash decisions out of desperation. Like the scene where he has one of the corrupted cops in the alleyway after the Joker had just taken Gordon, and he's flipping the coin to determine what happens to this guy. Before he's even melted his face and become physically Two-Faced, he is already becoming what Two-Face will be about. And when he does become Two-Faced and half his face is melted off, I don't know if that's mostly CGI or makeup work, but it looks incredible still to this day. Everything in The Dark Knight looks incredible. This movie will never feel dated because everything just feels so practical and tangible. Speaking of Rachel, she's no longer played by Katie Holmes. She's now played by Maggie Gyllenhaal. And I will say that with these two Nolan Batman films, the weak link consistently has been the relationship with Rachel and Bruce. I just don't really feel like it's established all that much. I don't really care for them as a couple, to the point that when this movie opens we find out that she's dating Harvey, I could care less whether Bruce gets with her or not. But the death of Rachel Dawes is probably the most bold thing a comic book movie had ever done up until this point. Because with comic book movies up until this point, the villain didn't kill off the superhero's love interest. That never happened. The hero always saved the girl. But not with The Dark Knight. No, the Joker doesn't play by anybody's rules, including the rules of comic book movies back in the day. One of the things that The Dark Knight also steps up from Batman Begins is the action sequences. The action in The Dark Knight is so much better than in Batman Begins. In Batman Begins, the editing was so quick, it was so kind of choppy, you couldn't always see what was happening with the action, especially with the combat scenes between Batman and the criminals. But with The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan shoots a lot of the action sequences in nice IMAX camera. On the Blu-ray, they look just so gorgeous as it fills up the whole frame. And there's just so many beautiful sequences within The Dark Knight. The Batpod chase as he chases after Joker in the semi-truck, that thing is just so awesome, and everything just feels so real. It's so exciting. The iconic interrogation scene between Joker and Batman, as Joker is baiting Batman, trying to get him to break that one rule, and Batman's just tossing the Joker around the whole interrogation room. You totally feel like any hit by Batman in this could be the Joker's last hit he'll ever take. And you know that he would just be so happy about that. Guys, I gotta be honest, I have a confession to make. Before this rewatch of The Dark Knight, I was one of those people that would say that it's overrated. I'm gonna chalk that up though to seeing it too young, because I first saw The Dark Knight when I was in my early teens, and I haven't really watched it since then, and I just don't think I got it back then. But now that I've rewatched this as an adult, I fully understand all of the story plots, all of the way that it connects together. It's not just Heath Ledger's performance that makes this movie so great. It's the writing of the character and how he affects the whole story and the characters within it throughout the entire running time of this movie. The Dark Knight is definitely one of the best, if not the best, comic book movie sequel ever made. One of the best movie sequels ever made, period. Steps everything up from the first one. Everyone brings their A game, from the writing to the acting to the editing to the production design to the sets to the props to the visual effects. This movie is fantastic. With Batman Begins, there are some things that I could pick out that are nitpicks and could be seen as flaws. I couldn't pick out a single thing in The Dark Knight that I didn't like. I was engaged in this movie like I've never been before from start to finish. I love The Dark Knight. I am jumping off of that overrated train. The Dark Knight is a strong recommend from me. Alright guys, as I mentioned before, I didn't say everything that I have to say about The Dark Knight, and there's so much more to talk about. And that's where you guys come in. Jump down in that comment section below and let me know your thoughts on The Dark Knight. Guys, thank you so much for clicking on this video and checking out my channel. Joining me for another Batman review. Come back again next week. We'll be finishing off the Nolan trilogy with The Dark Knight Rises. Until then, guys, if you haven't already and you like talking all things movies, TV, and all things entertainment, why don't you go on and click that subscribe button, click that like button, click that notification bell, all that YouTube stuff. And I hope to talk to you guys again real soon.